Hey, and welcome to Game Talk. I'm your host, Ahmed Mian. Today I'm joined by Connor.
Hi, guys.
And Mike is out for work, so it'll just be the two of us today. Originally, we were going to dedicate this episode to the slew of upcoming games that we are very excited for, but news broke literally today. Historic news of Concord being shut down permanently and having refunds issued, which is a very sort of unprecedented historic move, especially for someone like Sony. It's just a colossal failure on every front, and I think we need to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't make it 2 weeks. It made it 11 days to this announcement. I think it'll be 2 weeks, if I'm understanding what I read right. 2 weeks when it gets shut down.
Astonishing. We all predicted this game to be a failure, but even we couldn't predict the extent of this failure. This is by far the biggest, I think, AAA bomb in history. I mean, this runs circles around the likes of Anthem, Suicide Squad. It's just...
I mean, this is probably the worst video game failure ever.
Since E.T. or something like that.
I think, I was looking at some numbers, I think this is worse than E.T. And E.T. only cost probably less than $200,000 to make.
Yeah, so this game took 8+ years.
Yeah, E.T. was less than
certainly a 9-figure budget, being a AAA game made in the 2020s.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's a shame. I feel very bad for the developers. This certainly has the stink of mismanagement all over it. And we do have to rewind a little bit if we want to start casting blame around. Concord was in development for over 8 years. And during that time, Sony, specifically the head of first parties, right? We assume it was Herman Hulst's decision, but we don't know for sure. It could have been Jim Ryan being involved too, made the decision to purchase Firewalk Studios based off what they saw of Concord. That level of decision-making, that tells me you are not fit to be leading the Sony first parties. If you truly believe that, because
see, that's totally not what I expected. So Concord, I'd assumed this was some bigwig at Sony that said we need an Overwatch clone, which I guess it was.
No. So this game was in development by a studio that was then purchased by Sony, who saw immense potential in this game.
That dude's just
like,
an idiot.
what?
Like there was this game. Above all, challenges an idea that I have, which is that a bad idea done well is better than a good idea done poorly. And I do think this is a bad idea done well, and it's just a complete waste of time.
Yeah, and speaking to that a little bit, the people who have played the game certainly seem to think that the bones of the game are good, the gameplay is solid, it feels good to play, maybe not exceptional like something like Overwatch, but the issue to me seems to be in just the lukewarm presentation. The characters, for being a hero shooter, are extremely bland and uninteresting. The world is uninteresting, and it just feels derivative, and no one wants to play it in a world where a dozen of these games exist and do what it's trying to do much better.
Yeah, it's just, as far as I can tell, it's just Overwatch again. Did you play it at all? You were talking about... Okay.
No.
Yeah, if it had been... No, I wouldn't have
played it. If it had been free, I would have tried it, just to try it.
Yeah.
Because it is a Sony first-party game, but the more of these games that fail, I'm sorry, the less that prestige that has.
It's devaluing and that's it for sure.
This frustrating to someone like me. Yeah.
This wasn't like a small knock on it either. This is an embarrassing failure.
No, I mean, I meant it when I said this is historic. We have not seen anything like this.
Like, it would be unimaginable for Nintendo to put out a flop on this scale.
A flop on this scale that had the backing of the entire company, a first-party game, and it flops and you have to pay people their money back. That's just unheard of.
That's what's crazy, is that they will get zero return on investment for this. Not even, like, you see game companies all the time crying a river because they only made a little bit of profit. And this is zero. They are losing the entire budget, the entire marketing budget. That's assuming they don't, the wording of the takedown message to me suggested they were going to restructure this game and try to release it again. But I think that is That is a
Yeah,
sunk cost fallacy. It is a waste of time.
I just feel like they can't come out and say this was a failure and this was an 8-year hole in the ground. The message had to read something like how it did. But I think all of us can read between the lines and say there's no way Concord sees the light of day ever again. There is a permanent stench on this IP now, and no matter what they do, no matter how they improve it, even if they release it free to play, retool everything, I don't think this game has a chance of being successful.
I mean, I think the IP is the problem more so than the game itself. The IP is irredeemably bland. What could you even do to make bland Guardians of the Galaxy good?
I mean, the only thing I can see maybe happening is taking some of like the bones of the game, like we were talking about, like the gameplay, the engine, the physics, whatever, and using that to basically create a new game. But I mean, do we really think Firewalk Studios is going to survive after a failure on this scale?
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And even just getting into the headspace of a developer that just spent 8 years laboring on a game. And when you're in these situations, a lot of the time you don't get to decide what game you're making. You go to work, you got a job at Firewalk, you're working on Concord. And I imagine a lot of them saw the writing on the wall, if not years ago, definitely when the game was announced, that this thing was not going to do well. And now just watching it, I have worked years on a game that didn't sell super well, but people can still play it.
Right, yeah. And plus, I mean, we're just talking about the scale of the error, too. Obviously, this would be a tragedy and a horror show, even if this was an indie game. Even if you scaled this down and it was a $500,000, $1 million project, that would still be a travesty. But we're talking at least $100 million game with the backing of Sony's first party, studio of 100 plus people, and this is the end result.
I mean, they need, after this launch, like Sony really needs to take a step back and think. I don't know what you change. I don't understand how, because surely they have their focus groups. They have their, that trailer had to have been shown to people before it was shown to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I seriously question the value of these internal focus groups. I mean, if we remember Redfall, which was also a failure, but not a failure on this magnitude, Redfall reviewed double digits better on their internal scale than what the Metascore ended up being, right?
Really?
So
focus groups typically aren't internal. Typically you sign up to be a part of a focus group and you see something,
right,
and give your opinion. I guess it's very difficult to get a large enough sample size to see what the world at large is going to think of something, but
yeah, I just don't understand. I don't understand how they could put this game out. They had their open beta, and that should have given them plenty of feedback as to this game was not going to garner interest. Like, in my head, it had to be the case that the beta came and went, right? It was so close to launch that Sony must have thought that, okay, we're just going to give it a go, but basically the game's already dead in our minds.
Yeah.
They had to have known early on, right? This stuff does not happen in a vacuum. So
8 years is just unthinkable. And granted, I don't think we know how much of that was pre-production, but 8 years of development on this game.
Yeah, I mean, just talking from like the perspective of a human lifespan.
Yeah.
That's just an absurd amount of time to spend on something that just is getting snapped out of existence.
Speaking in averages, that was 10% of their lives.
Oh my gosh.
I think the average man dies in his 70s, I think, in America.
In America, I think. Yeah.
Ours is pretty bad for a developed nation, but
right.
I believe they were in America, weren't they? The Concord devs?
They're in Washington, yeah. So
Washington State.
Yeah, so they're there with that. I believe that's where Sucker Punch is as well.
Okay, yeah.
So other first party Sony presence there, but
I also don't. I didn't play the game, granted, but looking at footage of the game, I don't really see where 8 years went. It's pretty. Does it have like an insane number of maps or something? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if it did, you'd think it would be slightly more appealing
Yeah,
than.
it didn't look like a spectacular visual showcase to me. It looked like Overwatch, which looks fine, but Overwatch is tuned to run at 200 frames per second on a mid-range PC on low settings.
Right.
That's kind of the vibe I got from Concord as well. They wanted an esport. I don't understand how that took 8 years to make, personally. Unless if it's insanely tuned from a game design perspective, but I think it would have been smarter to release a game that wasn't so tuned and patch it.
Looking into this, because I find this whole thing fascinating, the story, not the game itself, which is kind of strange, but here we are. But it seems that Concord was designed to be a polished, fully thought out sort of platform that would be supported for years to come. So they had all of this in-game story and lore planned out for future updates and all of these things that a lot of times aren't in place, right? When a game like this launches in early access, you have the PvP aspect of it, and that's basically it, right? And maybe you have some flavor text, some lore, but they had maybe gone in the other direction and thought way too much about their future instead of just focusing on making a hit to begin with and then expanding into it.
Lesson hard.
Maybe that was one of their errors.
Yeah, because if you spend 8 years building all that before you even know if people are going to like your game, that's an obvious blunder to me.
And especially 8 years building a live service competitive PvP game, of which we know there's a very low success rate for those. Extremely low. So...
Granted, we didn't necessarily know that in 2016 when they started making it.
That is true, right? That's the other danger of this, is that this field moves so quickly. If Concord had been a single-player, story-based game, probably would have done fine.
Yeah,
it probably would have been completely fine.
Yeah.
But this audience that they're chasing, this golden goose that they're obsessed with, is costing them so much money, it's costing them so much time, it's costing them so much talent. And I hope that this is finally the canary in the coal mine that dissuades Sony from this live service notion. We've said this before. We'll say it again. The only issue I see, though, is Helldivers was a massive success for them. So they're going to think that it's possible. So I can't see them fully abandoning it, which is a shame to me.
Helldivers was a massive success. The only time I ever hear Helldivers get brought up anymore is that the players are mad about something. Always mad about something. I don't know what the deal with that game is now.
Well, I feel like that's par for the course for these live service games, though, right? They're around for long enough. You're gonna.
That hasn't been around that long.
That's true. Has it? It's not even been a year.
No,
yeah.
It came out in March, I want to say.
But it still has a healthy player base, and
yeah, it does. Okay.
I think Helldivers is kind of what Sony is looking to accomplish repeatedly, but
that's just not going to happen. That's an impossible ask. It's not replicable.
So in the context, right, it's if everyone could just do it, everyone would do it, right? It's not something that can be calculated. It's a flash in the pan kind of moment that just has to happen organically. And that's not something, certainly not something a corporate suit can tailor.
It's insanity because even the god king of the live service game, Fortnite, was not born that way. Fortnite morphed.
Right.
Fortnite Save the World was the original Fortnite, which was a colossal failure. Not on this scale. Not if we're looking at Concord, it wasn't a colossal failure, but it was on its way to being a failure for Epic Games. And then they released Fortnite Battle Royale as a side mode, and it just popped off. And they saw that they didn't build this gigantic thing. They saw this thing that had the potential to become gigantic that was already in the hands of players, and they already loved it, and they cultivated it and grew it into the juggernaut that it is today. And I don't understand how Sony can see that happening and then think that making an Overwatch clone is a good idea.
Yeah, I don't know. So to me, I think it's important to reflect in the wake of giant failures like this, and some responsibility has to be taken. I think the responsibility has to lie with either the president of Sony or the head of their first-party studios. So that's either Jim Ryan, who's gone now, or Herman Hulst. Right?
Yeah.
So Herman Hulst, ever since the PS5 generation started, he was promoted from head of Guerrilla Games So he was the lead director for Horizon Zero Dawn, which obviously was a huge success from Sony. But to go from that to be president of their entire first-party portfolio, at the time, I was like, okay, Horizon was a success, but was it really worth that much to them to promote this man to be in charge of all of their first-party games?
Isn't Horizon Zero Dawn their best-selling game ever? The best-selling Sony first-party?
Their best-selling, well, right now their best-selling first-party game is Helldivers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was it Horizon before?
No, Horizon sold very well. It was their best-selling new IP.
Okay. Yeah, I know we had that leak a while ago, and I don't remember any of the numbers from it.
But so Horizon did very well. That's the important thing, right?
Yeah.
But well enough to make this man in charge of all the first parties, right?
He also hadn't proven that was a repeatable success at that time.
Right.
And it kind of wasn't.
Yeah.
Horizon Forbidden West did not do Horizon Zero Dawn numbers. It did
It
well.
certainly did not
very well. But
yeah, it did not light the world on fire in the same way Horizon Zero Dawn did. And prior to that, Guerrilla made Killzone games, which are respectable and sold
it was like a
respectably,
consistent AA game. Yeah.
But they certainly were not sales juggernauts like, I don't know, Spider-Man, God of War, Uncharted. These games are more proven successes than Horizon, in my mind at least. And yet Herman Hulst becomes the head of the first parties, right? He becomes head of the first parties, and the era of the PS5 starts with, admittedly, some great games. We get Returnal. We get Demon's Souls, which is a remake, but was a valuable, I think, addition to launch the PlayStation 5 with. We get Spider-Man, Miles Morales, Spider-Man 2. We get Ratchet and Clank. 3 of these games are Insomniac games, which is crazy. We get God of War Ragnarok. We get Horizon Forbidden West. And then it's really just crickets. I mean, we get exclusives on the system like Final Fantasy 16 third-party deals. But in terms of the powerhouse first parties, we really don't see anything for the longest time. And then when we do, we get these multiplayer games like Helldivers and now Concord, and that is kind of the state of things.
So timeline-wise, all of those single-player games probably started development before Holtz was in charge, do you think?
Oh yeah, so I imagine, right, so these sequels, right, God of War 2018 came out in 2018, right? So you'd imagine that's when Ragnarok started development. Similarly,
probably before that, even.
Well, you'd think the game would have to come out and do well for a sequel to be greenlit, but for a known quantity like God of War, it is very feasible that pre-production started before.
So studios typically have they typically have something like 5 games ahead planned at one time. No guarantee those are going to be greenlit, but they typically know what the next game...
Some level of pre-production, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's just a game design document or something. Someone somewhere is thinking about it. But obviously, development in earnest came after 2018 and after all the patches for 2018.
Right.
Using God of War as an example. So, these first-party single-player games, yes, they were likely heavy in production at the end of the PS4's life cycle. And the PS4 did not have any of these exclusive live service multiplayer games that Sony seems to be chasing. This definitely is a strategy with the launch of the PlayStation 5 to sort of pivot this console to appeal more to competitive multiplayer gamers. And I imagine that decision, it's probably a combination of both of these individuals, Jim Ryan and Herman Hulst, who saw this as a good idea, as a good direction for their portfolio of first parties. And then you have Naughty Dog working on a Last of Us Online game, and you have Guerrilla Games themselves are also working on a Horizon multiplayer game. You have a Twisted Metal multiplayer live service game that was in development, that has now been canceled, by the way. You have Helldivers, which is a success, but not one grown from Sony's internal first-party studios. Yeah. And now you have Concord, which is produced by a studio that they purchased based off the promise of live service success, and now you have the biggest bomb of them all. So now I think that eyes are really turning to, well, one, Fair Games, which is their next big kind of games as a service effort. It's going to be an extraction shooter, and as I understand it, there's somewhat of a desire for these extraction shooter games on console that isn't really being met. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that space.
I think that is true. I honestly, I think there's a desire for an extraction shooter that is a polished product in any meaningful way. I've seen footage of Tarkov, and that's like the extraction shooter, I think. And it looks horrible to me. It looks so bad. It looks unfinished. It doesn't, I don't know, it just looks like a mess to me. That makes me wish someone would take another swing at it and get popular. That's why I think Marathon could be fun. Isn't that supposed to also be an extraction shooter coming from Bungie?
Yeah, Bungie, but the state of Marathon does not seem very...
Yeah.
Marathon has... Let's just put it this way. Obviously, we can't know until these games are out, but the fervor surrounding Marathon is not good right now.
Yeah. Internally
at Bungie, it seems like to be in very bad shape. And weirdly enough, it seems like Fair Games might actually be the success story out of Concord, these trio of games, right? Concord, Fair Games, and Marathon. But we'll see, right? There's, like I said, there's no way of knowing until these games really hit the market and the audiences judge them.
It's so messy, right? Because I think Sea of Thieves came out in 2018, and it's another, I would say, modest success in the live service game space. I don't think, it's not on the level.
I think Sea of Thieves is quite the success story.
I agree. It's just not like
someone like Rare.
Level. Yeah.
To pivot to live service, and granted it took a few years to really get going, but it has a healthy player base of millions of players now. That's more than you could really ask for.
I think it's just interesting to look at the climate when Sea of Thieves was coming out. I was excited for Sea of Thieves from the first time I saw it. I thought it looked interesting. I don't know if you remember how you felt, but I was interested in it. I didn't play it at launch.
No, I mean the idea of an open world live service pirate game was very appealing to me.
Right.
But the more I saw of it, the more I kind of didn't want to play it. But in recent years, seeing how it's grown and changed, that shifted again, where I'm like, okay, this seems like a very good, fun game to play.
Yeah, it came out pretty half-baked. Even when I first played it, I think over a year after release, it felt a little half-baked, and I came back to it later, and it wasn't anymore. It felt awesome. But I think if it was announced today, if you announced Sea of Thieves in a post-Concord world, I'm thinking, God, what happened to Rare? What a waste. What a waste of a talent. And then I'm shocked to see what ends up actually happening.
Yeah, so Rare would have that baggage, right, of being known for these historic platformers back in the day.
Right.
But Firewalk had no such reputation, right? Firewalk really didn't have baggage associated with them. They were kind of a fresh face, and they definitely have baggage associated with them now.
No, they're cooked. As a studio wonder.
Yeah, this is your big moment on stage, and you've tripped and fallen on your face, and I'm sorry. I mean, I feel for those people over there. They've got to be hurting, but like I just don't see a happy ending there at all.
No, because even I think of No Man's Sky and how that game came out horrendous, but it came out horrendous, but it sold millions of copies.
It did, yeah.
So they had the budget.
That was the difference.
Yeah. If this had been a bad game that sold, but I don't even think it is a bad game. I think it's just not what there was no audience that wanted this game.
See, in many ways, it is worse than a bad game.
Yeah,
it is a game that no one cares about.
It's not even broken.
Indifference. Yeah.
At least as far as we know. It could be horrendous. Right. We wouldn't know.
But complete indifference, which is worse than being a bad game. Because being a bad game, at least that generates discussion. There's something interesting about being bad. But with Concord, there's just nothing.
Right.
Unfortunately.
An interesting fact I read earlier today, I don't know if this is still true, because I do believe if you can't buy Concord anymore. It's not for sale.
Right.
I guess
they halted sales and they're issuing refunds.
You could probably buy a disc, but the refunds aren't out yet. But earlier today, I saw a comment on Reddit, not exactly a scholarly source. I don't know how to check this. You might. But there was only one person in the world that had a platinum trophy in Concord.
Yeah. So you can check percentages of trophies. I don't know if you can check individual numbers, but Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't surprise me, right? We're talking about a player base measured by thousands, right? We're not talking about hundreds of thousands.
It never hit 1,000 on Steam concurrent players.
Right, but I'm talking if
Total
we combine Steam and PlayStation, and we don't have the PlayStation picture, but looking at Steam, I think you can really kind of gauge it, right? Like, let's be generous and say the split is 30-70 Steam, PlayStation. We're being generous there.
Yeah.
Even with those kinds of numbers, we're talking about thousands of copies sold, which is just an unbelievable disaster for a game on this scale.
It's also worth noting that we have every reason to believe it's the opposite. Helldivers was substantially more popular on PC than on PlayStation.
That's true. Yeah. So, but yeah, even imagining the best case scenario, we're left with abysmal numbers. Man.
Hate to see it. Hate to see it.
I'm frustrated, man, because I hate to see it. I feel bad for those developers, but Sony, I told you so. We all told you so.
The whole world knew when they gave 20 minutes or whatever to this game.
And Sony insists that, no, we can pull this off. Just give us another chance. And time again, we see, if not games come out and flop like this, because this is really the first we've seen of this ilk.
Right.
But we've seen canceled games.
Right.
And at this point, it might have been worth just canceling Concord to avoid this kind of embarrassment. Because, quite frankly, I think they made this move like they did of just saying, okay, we're going to stop all support and just pull the plug now so they can probably just write it off on their taxes as a loss.
It does make me wonder how many games get to that, get to 3 years ago, for instance. Concord's been in development 5 years at this point. And I have to imagine 5 years ago you could tell this, or 3 years ago you could tell by then this game was going to flop. I imagine the climate around these live service games was spoiling it. It would have been reasonable, I think, to cancel.
Another issue is that a lot of times with these long dev cycles, these teams are kind of siloed away. Right? You're not saying you don't have any access to the outside world, because that's crazy, but you're really kind of heads down working on your project, and when you resurface, you'll see that the landscape has shifted drastically from when you started working, and then at that point, it's just too late.
Yeah. Yeah, 8 years is just
game
too
development
long.
is a behemoth, right? It's a collection of very small decisions that create a larger whole, and you can't just reverse it at the snap of a finger.
No.
So by the time they realize that, oh, maybe what we have is outdated, they were probably far too late to do anything about it.
No, I'm a believer that 5 years is like the longest dev cycle you can that could possibly be sustainable. Because even then, you're almost certainly not releasing on the same console that are in players' hands when you start developing. Because console cycles are about 7 years lately.
7 to 8 years, yeah.
Yeah. 5 years is so long.
Well, 5 years is long, but yeah, Concord was
8 years,
which is a full generation.
A full generation.
Yeah, so...
And 8 years ago, like, you play Overwatch, everybody's in love with Overwatch 8 years ago. I see how this game looked like a good idea in 2016. That doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
It seems like a brilliant idea 8 years ago.
But I think it just speaks to the philosophy of game development that I wish Sony would embrace, and they do embrace with certain studios, is that just let the studios make what they want to make. And it's very possible, and actually it's probably true, that Firewalk genuinely wanted to make an Overwatch.
Yeah, they'd started it
right?
before.
So
Sony
in their
acquired
case,
them.
in their case, that's fine, right? They wanted to make it, sure. But I think the key to making a successful game is, one, make the game you want to make. You can't chase trends. I can't put words in anyone's mouth, but I bet a large part to Firewalk wanting to make an Overwatch clone was the success of Overwatch.
Yeah.
And especially like a multiplayer game like that, trend chasing is almost never going to work out, because by the time you've made the game, the trends are different. But I really do feel like in a lot of cases where you make games that you really are passionate about, that you really have an idea for, whether it's popular or not, those cases turn out to be successes way more often.
It also,
I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that trend chasing, especially for multiplayer games, is almost never a good idea.
It explains why so many indie successes are retro-inspired games as well. They're proven. Shovel Knight, if it released tomorrow, would be no different than Shovel Knight the day it came out, because it is emulating this retro style.
Right.
already. So that's not a game. It doesn't age at all. It's a timeless game in that way. Shovel Knight's just the one I'm thinking of. There are lots of games like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do want to maybe reflect on a very kind of relevant tweet that I saw, and it got me thinking, comparing current Sony to EA, in which EA, if we remember way back when, like half a decade ago,
Most hated company in America.
right, well, that was one aspect, yeah, most hated company in America, they drop Anthem, abysmal failure by all metrics,
Yep.
ended up being a canceled live service project, and they were really betting all their chips on Anthem, right? They had their darling BioWare on it. This game bombs, and lo and behold, look at EA's output after Anthem. A deluge of single-player games that are all very good. We get Jedi Fallen Order and the sequel, you get the Dead Space remake, the Mass Effect re-release, and Dragon Age.
Yeah.
All of which are single-player games, no multiplayer aspects, no battle passes, none of that. And yes, they're not probably making the same amount of money as Fortnite, but who cares? These are successful games that they're putting out that are successful both critically and commercially, and that's really all you should aspire to in this industry.
Even
this idea of nonstop growth, infinite growth, is just killing these studios.
Even Epic can't do another Fortnite. They acquired Rocket League to incorporate it into their live service repertoire, and they tanked it. They cannot, Rocket League's in a far worse place than it was when they acquired it.
Is it really? That's a shame to hear.
From what I've
Rocket
heard.
League to me was always one of those kind of untouchable live service games.
People
seemed to always
are falling out of
do
love
no
with
wrong
it for sure.
Yeah.
Fall Guys as well. They acquired Fall Guys, and from what I've heard, I haven't played Fall Guys in a long time, but in the pursuit of making it cross-play with mobile, they've kind of killed Fall Guys by having to simplify everything so much, and it's kind of on the downturn. Apparently, it's losing to Stumble Guys now, which is the
knockoff?
Yeah, apparently Stumble Guys is eating their lunch right now. I don't have numbers to back any of this up. This is stuff I've heard watching streamers. So take it with a huge grain of salt. Unlike the usual facts that I spit that are 100% true on the show.
Oh, man. So that is the sad tale of Concord. I don't know, man. I feel like a broken record at this point saying I hope Sony's learned their lesson. I hope Sony's learned their lesson.
I could
but
probably
that's the thing,
do a
right?
30-minute
But the issue is that, I mean, we're still seeing the effects of decisions made basically a decade ago, right? I mean, so we won't really know if they've learned their lesson probably in another 5-6 years from now.
I just graduated high school when this game started development.
That's unsettling to think about, but it is funny to me, the duality of the situation where we have one of their biggest bombs and possibly one of their biggest successes happening in the same week.
Yeah.
So we have Astro Bot, which in many ways is the antithesis to Concord, coming out this week.
I would love to see it be one of their biggest successes, but I do not think it's going to be that
I think
big.
it'll be a success.
I do too. I think it'll be a massive
I don't think it's going to sell like Uncharted or Spider-Man. There's just no world in which that happens because
I bet it clears 10 million.
Unless you're a Mario, you're not going to. A platform is just not going to sell that well.
Yeah.
On that level. But I do think it'll sell very well, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope it does sell those levels of numbers, because it really... I want Astro Bot to be a statement, like a punch in the face to Sony executives. Yeah. Wake up. This is what your audience wants. Not Concord, not fair games, this. So I'm really hoping the sales for Astro Bot can speak the words that the executives need to hear.
But
that's
the microtransactions,
the only language.
Ended? Where's the long tail sales? Where's the microtransactions?
Right? Yeah, I don't know.
You don't even have to have PlayStation Plus to play Astro Bot. What are you talking about?
I know, right? Yeah.
Where's our...
Definitely can't infinitely grow with Astro Bot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it'll do well. So I just hope it does well enough to maybe shake Sony, shake some sense into Sony.
Yeah.
Please. Because the Sony I grew up loving is starting to really crumble. At least that's what it feels like to me. As the resident Sony fan of this podcast,
it's been a bad year for them, but God of War Ragnarok was only 2 years ago.
God of War Ragnarok was fantastic, but the thing they're missing in the PS5 generation that they certainly had in the PS4 generation is that brand new feeling, right? God of War is an existing IP, but when 2018 came out, it was a revolution, right? Horizon Zero Dawn, for all the flack it gets online, it was a stunning foray into the open world. It was a combination of their tried and true first-person cinematic story-based games with the open world format, and it worked. It was really, really good. And Bloodborne as well, right? Bloodborne, obviously that was a From Software game, but that was a Sony IP. That was a killer app on PS4. And the only thing we've kind of gotten in that same vein for PS5 is Returnal, in my opinion. Returnal was a breath of fresh air.
It banger.
It felt
really
new.
fun.
It felt powerful. It felt like a really strong start for the PS5, but we have not seen anything like it since.
I think Astro Bot might as well be a new IP for the PS5.
Astro Bot has that potential, yes.
Yeah. For most people. Most people did not have PSVR. And apparently there was another Astro Bot game on the PS4 for like the PlayStation Eye.
Yeah, there have been a collection of small like Astro Bot demos over the years.
Okay.
So yeah,
this is
the first full-fledged game.
Yeah.
Right, Astro's Playroom. Well, obviously Astro Bot Rescue Mission was a full-fledged game, but this is a non-VR game.
God, Astro Bot Rescue was so good.
Yeah, and I don't know if you watched that little like quick fire interview with the director of Astro Bot.
I did not.
But he did make it sound like that Astro Bot Rescue Mission release on PSVR 2 is not an impossibility. So if that ever happens.
But how would they even do it? It doesn't have enough cameras.
I don't know. They might be working on it.
Yeah,
but
they'd have to do some weird stuff because something about the way that it used the PS4 controller, the way that one game justifies the existence of the DualShock 4, which is just a piece of trash otherwise. I hate that thing, but it is so perfectly used in Astro Bot Rescue that it justifies everything about it.
And I imagine the DualSense will be used similarly in the new Astro Bot.
Yeah, I imagine so too, which is why it's interesting that there's talk of it coming to PC. You can use a DualSense on PC, but apparently you can. You only get the specific features if you're plugged in with a cord. I guess you can't wirelessly get HD Rumble and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, and plus on PC, I mean, you can use whatever controller you want, which is obviously
they could always just say no, you can't. They could lock it down.
They could lock it down, but
be unwise.
Yeah, I mean that's not going to be a popular decision. But the point is, like, Astro Bot is all about PlayStation. They're certainly going to use some DualSense exclusive features that might be hard to replicate on other controllers.
They're at least going to use gyro. It'd be crazy for them to not use gyro.
Oh, I'm sure they will. They'll use gyro. They'll use
probably use the touchpad,
the haptics. Yeah. They'll use all sorts. They'll squeeze every little bit they can out of the DualSense because that's what Asobi does. Right?
Well,
they make the most out of whatever they're given.
Haptics is something that you could strip out and it'll be a worse experience, but you could still play it on PC. But if it uses the touchpad, you just can't play it on PC.
Right, yeah. And I'm sure it will, right? I'm positive it will.
So
because that's just how those games work. They squeeze every bit out of the hardware they're on. So
yeah. It'll be interesting to see.
But yeah, so Astro Bot aside, Concord, rest in peace. You never had a chance.
And Astro Bot's in 3 days, right?
I believe Astro Bot is Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, so
yeah, 3 days.
I know what I'm doing this weekend.
If only.
Yeah, maybe one of these weekends for you before you
in 2 years,
lose interest.
When I lose interest completely, yeah.
All right, yeah, that actually went on for longer than I thought. Do you want to just talk about what we're playing and maybe we can discuss our anticipated games later?
Yeah, I've got 2 games I've been playing. Should I go first?
Yeah, you go first because I have one.
So the first game that I have been playing this past week is, I mentioned it on the Discord a few times, Super Mario Eclipse. Did you look at that at all? Yeah,
I watched the trailer for it.
I actually really didn't like it when I first started it. It's a mod for Super Mario Sunshine. And I was expecting a ROM hack experience. And I immediately was vindicated in that expectation because the very first thing it does is drop you into some custom levels that are tutorializing some new mechanics that are in the game. You can do this boost jump with the hover nozzle on Flood. This is for Super Mario Sunshine. I don't.
Right.
Yeah. You can do a boost jump with the hover nozzle for Flood. That's pretty neat. They changed the way that the dash nozzle, I forget, the boost nozzle, I don't remember what it's called. The one that makes you run really fast. They changed the way it works, and they just kind of changed the way some of the jumping in the game works. That it feels incredible. This is just an upgrade to Super Mario Sunshine in every conceivable way, as far as I'm concerned, mechanically. But then you're at Peach's castle, which is a scene that I don't understand why they added at all. And Peach says, "I'm so excited to go on this vacation." And then you get on the plane, and then it's just Super Mario Sunshine. It looks exactly the same as Super Mario Sunshine now. And you play a few levels of Sunshine, and I'm second guessing myself. I'm like looking for changes. I'm like, what did they do here? And then I see a path off to the side of one of the levels. And I know that wasn't there in the original game. And I walk down it, and this new area opens up, and then this weird dreamlike music is playing. I'm weirdly getting a creepypasta vibe from it at this point, because this weird dreamy music, this weird kind of liminal space. But no, it's not any of that. They just, because one of the cool things about Super Mario Sunshine is that it's not painting worlds or anything. It's all on Isle Delfino. They just added paths that actually connect every area on the island. You can actually walk.
Oh, that's cool.
In between them, so you don't have to unlock any of them anymore. From Delfino Plaza, you can play through the vast majority of this game without ever returning to Delfino Plaza, which isn't how I played it, but you could.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also a couple of new levels. There's Urto Rock. There's another hotel. There's a cool like Warship Bay area, and these are all unique geometry, unique characters, 8 shines and some secret shines and stuff. And it's all really pretty good. The worst of it is better than the worst level in this mod is better than the pachinko machine in original Sunshine. And it's pretty fun. I actually played all the way through it. It also has widescreen support, 60 frames per second, and it has 3 playable characters. You can unlock Luigi and Il Piantissimo as playable characters. And Il Piantissimo is really fun because he doesn't have Flood. So he can't hover.
So how does...
He throws jars of water for interacting with stuff, but he cannot hover. He doesn't have that. He's really, really fast and jumps really high, and he has a double jump. But he can't get the other nozzles or anything. So there are some shines you can't do as him. But it's just really cool. It feels like, at its best, it feels like Super Mario 64 DS, kinda. Like, I could see this being an HD remake with a little more polish, just being an HD, because, you know, GameCube emulation is so good it feels native at this point. Dolphin is such a good emulator.
Right.
This feels, and also once you beat the game, there's a bunch of new stages that I haven't even had a chance to explore. You actually go to Daisy's Cruiser from Mario Kart Double Dash, and that's your new hub world, and there's a bunch of new levels there, and it's just really good. It feels, it's a great game. It makes me really sad. This was in development for 4 years, and I feel like nobody's going to play it because not only, you know, they obviously can't sell it, but they can't even distribute a complete ROM. They distribute a patch file that you have to yourself apply to a ROM of Super Mario Sunshine. I just think so few people are going to do that, and that's such a shame because this is the definitive Super Mario Sunshine experience to me now. Like, anytime I go back to play it, I think this is what I'm going to go to.
It's just a labor of love, I guess.
Those improvements are just so good. The extra levels are fine, I guess. There's definitely, it doesn't have that loving Nintendo level design, but how could it? It's an amateur work, you know? These guys put a lot of love into it. And when it's good, it is quite good. And the new characters are super fun. Mechanically, it's so rock solid. It's just a cool way to revisit that game. I've been on a Mario kick lately, and for 5 or 6 days, I was just enamored with this. I could not put it down.
So let me ask you, the only way Nintendo can come after these guys is if they try to sell it, right?
I think Nintendo can technically DMCA someone for any reason. They don't need...
Okay.
Yeah, you could be DMCA'd for any reason because a DMCA is not a lawsuit. It is just a a request for
Take
you
it
to
down
stop
or we
doing it.
will sue you. Yeah.
And I do not think these people would do anything other than just acquiesce to a DMCA.
Right.
They would be fools not to. That hasn't happened yet. It's hard to say whether or not it will. A lot of these ROM hacks tend to be safe as long as they're distributed in this way, where they're not distributing any of Nintendo's actual assets or anything.
Right.
You have to have a copy of Sunshine. Although I think arguably they are distributing some of Nintendo's assets, because I think a lot of the custom levels are made of Super Mario Galaxy assets. So,
oh, really?
yeah. So I don't really know. I don't know how long this will be around. This isn't the first Super Mario Sunshine ROM hack, but it is the biggest and the best, in my opinion, so far. So.
Yeah, so extra levels, extra characters, and extra mechanics. That basically sums it up.
Yeah, and an interconnected world that goes even further than the original game. You can actually walk, I think, every single level you can walk to without taking any, like even out of Delfino Plaza, you can walk to the levels once you know where to start. So,
Cool.
It gets a very high recommendation from me. Wish anyone, I guarantee no one I know is ever going to play this game, because it is such a pain to get it running.
Yeah. I mean, certainly you'd think they're going to look into that next now that the game's out, because that's how you get it in more people's hands. Lower the barrier to entry to actually run the thing.
Well, they just can't, though. To legally distribute this game, they can't distribute an actual complete ROM. And it's not even that hard to patch it. It's just those extra steps are enough that a lot of people are just never going to bother. And let alone
enough of a deterrent unless you're like a super diehard Mario Sunshine fan.
Let alone, like, how many people do you know that actually have an emulator installed on their computer? It's not
right.
It's not mainstream.
It's just cool. It's cool to know this is out there, regardless.
Yeah, if you're ever itching to play, well, the other thing is you kind of need a controller. You need a specific controller to play it, because it uses, what's it called? Analog. You need an analog controller to play this game. It's essentially unplayable without an analog controller. So I've been playing it with my the same controller I play everything with, my 8-bit Do controller, because I couldn't get my GameCube controller adapter to work with RetroArch. I'm sure it's possible, but I didn't bother. It's also worth noting 60 FPS, 4K, widescreen, everything. Super.
Yeah,
clean.
60 FPS really important for that game, I think.
The original's only 30.
I thought it was a crime when Nintendo released the Mario collection. The only game they made 60 was Galaxy.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. This is actually built into the ROM hack, not not like an emulator setting. It actually has a 60 FPS mode in the hack. Nice. So same with widescreen. You can force most GameCube games to be widescreen, but there's usually bugginess. This game actually has a setting in it to enable widescreen, and it works flawlessly. And it's really fun. Anybody who is willing to put in the effort to play retro game, to have an emulation set up, and it's a easy recommendation. It's really fun.
Right on. All right. So I was out of town this weekend, so I haven't played this in a while, but I was playing Black Myth Wukong.
Oh, okay.
So this game I don't think really needs any introduction. Yeah, especially in China. I mean, the sales of this game just were on a level that I did not see coming, even the slightest. So that sparked a bit of curiosity in me. So I picked up the game for PC, where I did my due diligence, right? That's where you want to play this game. You don't want to play it on console.
Really?
Well, I guess depending on the hardware you have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, always. But does it just not run well? What's the issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's just frame issues. It's just kind of a blurry mess on PS5. So, yeah, I watched some Digital Foundry videos, purchased it on PC, and it's a fun game. I'm enjoying my time with it a lot. I think the biggest thing for it, right now at least, it is absolutely the, oh my god, look at these graphics game.
That's what
right? It is the crisis of the modern era. It looks unbelievably good. The graphics will sear your eyeballs off. And I'm running this on a 4080, and I'm maxing everything out at 1440p, mind you. I don't have a 4K monitor, but 1440p, that sweet spot where I can use my 4080 to max out a game like Black Myth Wukong using DLSS quality mode, which works like magic in this game.
Right.
Using frame gen, I'm getting 70 to 90 plus frames at any given moment, no matter how much heavy action is happening on screen.
Are you with full path tracing on and everything? Because I heard that
everything on.
I've heard that the path tracing optimization in this game is miraculous, kind of, on PC.
Yeah, I mean, it performs so well, right? So this game is looking as beautiful as it does at 60 plus frames per second, which just kind of seals the deal, right? You've got this insanely modern looking game with all the latest features, path tracing, beautiful, gorgeous lighting.
That's 60 plus after frame gen?
After frame gen, yeah. Pre-frame gen, I probably wouldn't hit 60.
Yeah.
But actually, I tried it. I was hovering around like 50.
Okay, so that's not bad. But the frame gen's not giving you that much. That's kind of strange.
Frame gen's giving me like 20 to 30.
Yeah, that's weird. So, I would expect it to double it, but it's kind of beside
I mean,
the point.
I'm not complaining.
Yeah,
exactly. It looks fantastic. No perceptible lag too, like even with the frame gen on. And that's important in this game because it's very much an action game.
Yeah.
So this game, let's see, it definitely takes some elements from the Souls series. It definitely takes some elements from God of War. And it definitely takes some elements from action games like Devil May Cry, I think.
Oh, really?
So it is a game where you play as, and I'm going to butcher this heavily because I have very little familiarity with Journey to the West besides references in Dragon Ball and stuff. But you play as the Destined One, right? The one who will basically climb the mountain and be the new monkey god or whatever.
Yeah, you're
I don't really
the
know.
Steps of Wukong, right?
Right, yeah. And you have your staff, right? That's your main weapon, which I equate to like the power pole from Dragon Ball. And it's true, right? It extends and all of that. And the intro to this game, you're flying on a cloud, like the Nimbus. And again, I'm just referencing touchstones that I have. If there are any Chinese listeners to this podcast, they probably want to tear their ears off right now.
Or leave us a comment correcting it.
But yeah, well, just speaking on the intro to this game for a little bit, it is just mind-blowing. So you're playing as Sun Wukong before he gets defeated or whatever, and he's riding in on this cloud. You're fighting like this pantheon of gods in the sky above the clouds, and the clouds are all shaping and deforming based off your attacks, and it is a spectacle.
That sounds sick.
It looks incredible. And it really reminded me of something like God of War 3, when Kratos is just challenging the entire pantheon, and it's just this wild spectacle.
Yeah.
And the intro to the game kind of remind me of that, where you're facing off against all these gods, and like you're seeing all these crazy visual effects on screen. But the Wukong is defeated, and then like several eras later, an unspecified amount of time later, there is another monkey who is the Destined One who follows in Sun Wukong's path. And I think that's kind of like the Journey to the West kind of story being adapted through this character's travels. And it is very fun. And what I will say about this game is that I respect the fact that it knows that it is an action game. You're either traversing the world, the level design's nothing to write home about, right? It's just basically get point A to point B while fighting enemies. You're either traversing the world, fighting enemies, or fighting bosses. There's no inane puzzle solving or any of that.
Thank God.
Right? None of that is in the game. So it absolutely knows what it is and sticks to it, which I respect.
Yeah.
In a game like this. So
a lesson to God of War.
Well, that's the thing too. A lot of people accuse this game of being a boss rush because of how frequently you're fighting bosses.
That.
I don't think I would call it that. You're still sort of going through the world, but the frequency of boss fights is really high. Higher than basically any other game I can think of that isn't a boss rush.
Accuse is a strange word for it, but it feels apt from what I've seen online. But accuse is such a strange, how dare you be a type of game?
Yeah. I mean, people were using it like in a derogatory way, which I wasn't really understanding.
I like
either.
boss rush games sometimes. Cuphead's fun.
I don't think it quite is a boss rush because there is enough connective tissue there where it's not just like one boss after another, after another, after another. But it's a fun game. It's a challenging game. It's nowhere near as hard as something like Elden Ring or the Souls games. Like, you're not going to after a few tries, you're going to get through every boss, at least where I am so far. I basically just started chapter 3, and I think there's 6 chapters in the game. With all the new games coming out, I don't know if I'm ever going to finish this game, but
Yeah.
I have enjoyed my time with it so far. I do think I've put like 15, 20 hours into it. So a decent chunk of time. And yeah, the first level, man. So each level takes place in a different environment, at least so far. The first level is a dense forest. And my God, if that was not the most beautiful forest I've ever seen in a video game. It was just unbelievable looking, man.
Yeah.
What a perfect showcase for the graphics in this game. Like, this is absolutely, you want to show your nerdy friends what video game graphics look like in 2024. You boot up Black Myth Wukong on your really nice PC, and you just walk around that forest, and their jaws are going to hang.
Yeah.
It is certainly a sight to behold. But the second environment, much to your frustration, Connor, is a giant desert.
I was thinking about buying it until you said that. I actually just lost interest.
So it's not a desert. It's like a rocky desert area.
Okay, that's better.
And the rocks look very good, but in contrast to the environment in the first part, the
boring,
first chapter,
right?
it was just such a step down. Not because of the fidelity of the game. It's just that you can't make rocks look that good. I'm sorry, you can't make sand look that good. Especially when you have all those vibrant greens in a forest.
No, frankly, I don't think anybody's ever done a desert better than Uncharted 3 so far.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was fine. But level 3, we're kind of back. It's a snowy mountain kind of area, and it looks quite good.
Yeah.
I think.
Better than the desert.
So, and I know, like, the graphics don't really matter too much to me in video games, but in a game like this, I feel like it does matter, where it adds so much to the presentation. Because without the insane visuals, I mean, the game is pretty basic, right? It's an action game. You fight enemies, you fight bosses. That's basically it. And the combat does have some depth to it, right? You have light attacks, heavy attacks. You have special abilities that you can use, like freezing your enemy in time for a few seconds, or like cloning yourself, or turning into rock to counter an enemy blow, things like that. So the combat has a decent amount of depth to it, and you can basically grow your character in different ways. If you want to focus on your abilities, like the time freezing, you can put more points into that. If you want to focus on the actual melee combat, you can put points into that. There are 3 different stances in the game as well, so good meaty combat, which is vital to a game like this, because you're basically only fighting or running around the world.
Yeah.
So combat is good. Like I said, level design very simple. It's mostly just to show off the world, which I think is the right move here. It knows what it is. It doesn't try to shoehorn in puzzles, and it just looks gorgeous. And that presentation adds a lot to this game. So
this game kind of makes me wonder. When I saw how well this game was doing, it kind of had me take a step back and think, oh, is this going to impact gaming for the next few years? Are there going to be companies that have now seen this massive Chinese audience will show up?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question to ask.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is probably yes.
Because as an American, we rarely have to experience being a secondary market.
Yeah, yeah.
And that Wukong kind of makes me think that might happen to us some.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly because China, just the population there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
Billions of people there, way more than in the United States, and their influence is only growing. So I imagine we'll see more projects like this coming out of China in the future. Which, I mean, I'm all for. I'm all for diverse perspectives, unique games. I mean, you're not going to really get a game like Wukong out of a Western studio.
Yeah, I'm happy to see games come out of China like Wukong. What makes me uneasy is the idea of American companies trying to chase that Chinese audience.
Right.
I think that I feel I love seeing, and I'm not even like afraid of American companies. I'm just interested in what impact that'll have. But I love seeing games from other cultures getting some popularity worldwide. I love to see that. Right.
So Black Myth Wukong, I had my doubts, but after playing it, it's a very good game. So I would recommend it, especially if you have a beefy enough PC. This is a showcase game unlike any other. So thumbs up for me. All right, Connor, what's your last game?
I'll close this out here with Tactical Breach Wizards. You might have seen me and Ryan talking about this on Discord, or seen NL playing it today.
Right, yeah. No, he's been playing it for many days now.
Really? I didn't tune in. I actually didn't think this was going to be something I was interested in at all. I'm not very good at tactics games, but this one, it's just really, it's a fun setting. It is like a SWAT team of wizards that you're playing as, essentially. And you're trying to stop a massive geopolitical conflict from happening. And the main conceit of the game is that one of your characters can see 1 second into the future, which constitutes a turn. So you can do whatever you want that turn and see what the results are going to be of that action, and you can undo it. And you can just really play around with all your powers and see what position you're going to be in. And a lot of these encounters can be ended in 1 or 2 turns. In fact, there are these things called confidence points you can earn, and a very common confidence point is ending a round in 1 or 2 turns. I spent 40 minutes yesterday to end 1 encounter in 3 turns.
Oh, wow.
For one of those.
So just to optimize it?
Yeah.
You don't have to do it that way, right?
No. I could have finished this in probably 8 minutes or something if I had played less optimally, but there were 3 confidence points. There was one, I had to use 1 attack that hit 6 enemies at a time. I had to use 9 abilities in a single turn, which, by my math, there might have been another way to do this, but I needed to do that. I needed to hit those 6 enemies and use 8 other abilities that turn. Otherwise, I wouldn't have enough abilities left to complete that objective. And I had to knock 2 people out of a window at the same time, which I could not do before I hit 6 enemies, because then there wouldn't be enough enemies left. So it took me 40 minutes. And granted, I'm bad at tactics games, but I sat here for 40 minutes staring at this room, trying to puzzle my way out of this.
That's cool, though.
And I loved it. And if you're not, I think me spending 40 minutes kills the pacing a little bit, but I'm doing it by choice. I am just not somebody. I have only skipped 1 of these confidence points so far in the entire game, and I went back later that evening and got it. I'm just not the kind of person that can skip those optional objectives, but I'm really glad they are optional, because having that option alone balances the game really well, I think, because it is not terribly difficult to just play through this game if you don't want to do those. But having that extra objective, and the only thing you get is cool clothes that you can unlock for your characters. That's all you get for doing the confidence objectives. You don't get more XP or anything like that. And I just love it. I think that's such an excellent way to tune difficulty. I've enjoyed doing all of them. It makes it a very complex puzzle. And the writing of the game is really good. It actually feels like a good reward for playing through these puzzles. The reward being the next bit of dialogue or whatever. The story, the overarching story itself is maybe not that interesting, but the writing is so good that you just kind of like reading what these characters are talking about. And it is a lot of text, but I just like it. Having a good time. Cool art style.
Yeah, I mean, I saw NL playing this, and it's very hard to... I feel like it's very hard, unless you're already into tactics games, for a game like this to be sold to you just watching gameplay, because it's a lot of thinking and then like moving a little bit and then thinking again. So just watching NL play it, I was just like, okay, I get that playing this is probably fun, but watching it isn't very fun, at least for me. But I have played tactics games in the past, and I've enjoyed them, so I imagine I would enjoy a game like this.
Yeah, I think the developers agree with you on that, because there is a pretty meaty demo on Steam. I think I spent over an hour on the demo. And by the end of the demo, I was like, sold. I'm buying this game.
Yeah.
I was not sold going into the demo, and I was properly sold by the end of it. I had such a good time. The writing was so good. They actually made me want to know what happens next in the story. The demo is just the first few levels. So
okay, yeah, that's definitely the right move by the devs.
Yeah.
And it's cool to hear that the story is very good, because oftentimes it's just fine in games like these.
Right.
From my experience.
It's just really good comedic writing. It had me chuckling out loud in my room by myself a few times.
I mean, just the premise itself is pretty absurd.
Yeah.
Tactical breach wizards. So
there's like little bits, like there's a character who has an ability that you don't know about and just don't have an option to use until she remembers that she has it several hours into the game, and she says, "Oh my god, I forgot I could do that." And then suddenly you have this power, and In so many games, that would just be like, if they tried to do that in Metroid Other M, I would be screaming at the screen in anger. But the way the writing is in this game, I just chuckled and was happy to have a new ability.
Yeah, it's all about presentation. That's cool. All right, I think that'll do it for us this week. Thank you all for listening. You can follow us at Podcast Game Talk on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Click the link in the description to join our Discord and talk to us there. Please like, rate, review us on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or any other podcast services you use. Thank you, Connor.
Yeah, see you guys next week.
See you next week. Bye.